So, experts at work, what works in executive transitions? And as I say, welcome back, Navid Nazemian, Head of HR Group Finance, Vodafone, Executive Coach, and author of the forthcoming Mastering Executive Transitions, which is excellent. I've seen an advanced copy and it's very well written. Navid's going to be running some polls in the session today, so nice and interactive. Send us questions and suggestions via chat throughout. We'll have Q&A in the last 15 minutes, roughly, with a hard finish at 3 p.m. Now, very excitingly, first 10 people who message me, I'll take a note of who you are and connect you to Navid, and he will be in touch to send you a free copy of the book. So go for your life, and I'll take a note of who, as it were. Oh, that was quick. What a noise. Who raises their hands. So if otherwise, you put yourself on mute for now, if you would. Thanks very much. Navid, the floor is yours, and thank you again for doing this.
Thank you very much, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be speaking to this topic of mine, which has been 7 years in the making to make it into a book. And thank you also to Richard and Anton, who have kindly helped me to make what I call a very crappy manuscript into an actual book. So big congratulations, and thank you to my heavy pen readers who are on the call today. So as Richard mentioned, most of you know me maybe from my kind of HR background and work, but you may or may not be aware that I actually get a call here and there sometimes to work with someone at the senior level on their transition. So this may be a transition into a new position, transition to a new company, and so on. So this is kind of the other passion of mine. What are we going to cover today? So we are going to look at what are the most common transition types. I like to look at them as transition challenges because I find it more compelling to look at it more as a challenge. We also will have a view of what is it that causes executive transitions to fail, and what is, roughly speaking, the cost of failure, as well as what are some proven interventions that actually work in practice. I'm sure most of you will have read or at least heard about this wonderful book, The First 90 Days, Michael Watkins, the big guru, who has been a professor all his life and a consultant. And so this book has sold over 1 million copies and has been translated in 24 languages. But sadly, it doesn't quite work at the senior level. And this is why I felt compelled to also write about this topic. Then we're going to cover a very brief case study. So this is a CHRO who we work together on their transition. And lastly, we want to make sure that there's plenty of time left for Q&A, and I will be looking to Richard to expertly moderate that part of our session today. So let's get going, and let me give you a very short overview of what is a leadership development coach, what is a transition acceleration advisor, and how does it all work in the context of a transition coach. So essentially, a transition acceleration advisor is someone who's been trained on this methodology or any other methodology. So all they do is making sure that they work with the leader for the first 90 days on their transition. So this is essentially the raison d'etre. Now, if I look at the leadership development side of it, and this is, by the way, how I was trained initially. Most coaches go through either a leadership development coaching education, a business coach education, or a life coach education. These are the three big streams of education you can have as a coach. And so you will see that the focus is quite different. The length of time you spend with the leader is different. The skills you need in order to be able to be a good coach in one versus the other are quite different as well. And so essentially what I wanted to share here is that the executive transition coach, people like me and other people who have done this work, try to combine the best of both worlds. So they work with a structured and systematic framework of some kind. And at the same time, there will be aspects of the transition at the very top that require just more time. And some of them may or may not be related to behavioral topics and leadership and change topics. And therefore, that's the idea. That's a simple idea of what an executive transition coach actually does. Now, if you look at the most common types of transitions, there are plenty. So in his new book, Michael Watkins, same author of The First 90 Days, has written a companion book. And so he hasn't changed his model. The model was introduced 18 years ago into the management world. Arguably, it is the most successful onboarding model that exists. And yet, I think it's fair to say that 18 years after any model is being introduced, looking at what has been changing on the leadership side, on the management side, it's fair to assume that you also need to start looking at your model. But the companion outlines 8 unique transition types. And I won't spend too much time going through them, but essentially just sharing with you that the transition type may be starting in an entirely new organization, getting a big promotion. You may be, and I have had that pleasure once, where I was in the race for getting kind of the leader role in a team where I was a peer with all of my previous peers. And I got to step up and do that role, which changed the whole dynamic of our working together. And there may be other kind of types of challenges coming your way. So if we start at the failure rate, and I did mention to you that there are many reasons why that is the case. Let's start at the kind of meta level and break it down into where is the relevance to executive transitions. So the first thing is, we all work in organizations, and we all have seen change strategies and transformation efforts failing. And as HR people, we know too well why that is the case. But if we start to double click on why only 1 out of 3 very well formulated strategies actually make it, it's down to poor execution. And if we double click on poor execution, we quickly see that failed executive transitions is one of those reasons. So that kind of brings us to our actual topic. And don't take my word for it. Heidrick & Struggles, one of the large search firms, has done this survey over a 12-year time period, over 20,000 executive placements. And they found that 40% of those over 20,000 placements that they did were not around anymore 18 months into that tenure. So at the same time, if you look at things like CEO turnover rate, you see that it has gone up quite drastically. And so there are many, many indicators, many more studies essentially landing on that 40% failure rate, whether it's the Center for Creative Leadership or McKinsey and Harvard Business Review. They all come to the same conclusion. Some start to unpack it and say, okay, but the failure rate of internally promoted execs is only 35%, and that of externally hired is 47%. Fair enough. For sake of simplicity, I'll just go with the 40% because I find that the Heidrick study is quite compelling indeed. So we all want to know by now, why is that? You know, in our experience, and we all have seen this before, why is it that so many executive transitions do fail? And this brings me to our first really simple poll, and I would encourage you to type any reason into the chat as to why, in your experience, do you believe executive transitions fail or all over again? And you can type in more than one reason if you have more than one reason that speaks to you or that you have observed over the years. Okay, so I see cultural fit mentioned by several people, lack of clarity, expectations, misunderstanding of the role, unrealistic expectations, doing before listening, so acting before listening. Don't understand how the enablers work in the organization, unable to influence the agenda, sink or swim mentality because not supported, lacking feedback, stereotyping. Yes, Richard, we could stop the masterclass right now because we seem to have an expert audience attending. So thank you so much for participating in this quick poll. And we got quite a number of these coming up as we go along, just to keep the engagement high and make it a little more interactive. But let me give you what I have outlined in the book as to what I believe the reasons are. And again, bear in mind that with one exception, all of these reasons are pre-pandemic. So the pandemic will have only one tiny role to play, but all of what you're going to see here is kind of pre-pandemic. So firstly, we see that a survey that was conducted recently by Ego and Zenda found out that 70% of all CEOs who took part in the survey said that they were completely underwhelmed by their own onboarding process or had no structured onboarding at all. Now, mind you, if you are the CEO, I would bet you get better coffee than most of the people in the same organization. So if that's what you get served as part of your onboarding, you can imagine what the rest of the company is going to be served at. The second reason is that CEO turnover is going down, and it continues to go down. So if you see, I read the other day another study that said, 1 out of 7 CEOs don't actually see the third anniversary in the same organization. Now, this is irrespective of transitions. So that essentially means you have a lot less time available. And if that's the case, well, chances are you're going to be a little more focused on the short term, and you may not necessarily put in what is required in the long term to see that organization to be successful. Another study that I read has found that the level of organizational complexity over the last 10 or 12 years has increased by a factor of 35. So again, it's not twice as complicated as before, it's 35 times more complicated. Personally, when I did my own meta study of the top 10 reasons for executive transition failure, the 3 aggregated reasons, so the 3 reasons that seem to be often getting in the way, are politics, people, and culture, all of which you have mentioned in the chat kindly when I ask you to say what are the reasons in your opinion. Executive overwhelm is often the case. Again, chances are that you have multiple transitions that are overlapping with one another. So if you have been hired externally to come and lead the organization and you got a big promotion, you may be talking about 3, 4, 5, or 6 transitions at the same time. It's a new organization, that's the first transition. It's a big promotion, that's your second transition. It may be a new industry, that may be your third transition. It may involve moving, family, house, and all the rest of it. That's your fourth transition. It is a new culture that you're not quite accustomed to. That's the fifth transition. So as you can see, how easily the transitions start to stack up. And with that is a higher likelihood of failure at the same time. Another study I got a hold of looked at core KPIs. So this is main KPIs for CEOs. And again, that seemed to have increased quite a bit. And so, it's quite common these days that you find CEOs having more than 20 key objectives and some up to 40, particularly if they are venture capital back or private equity kind of owned companies. So you can see how this all kind of results, whether you take the lower job satisfaction, lower engagement levels, increased span of control, gone are the days where the CEO had only 5 reports. There's this famous saying from the ex-Amazon CEO, Jeff Bezos, who said, if you can't feed your leadership team with 2 pizzas, you're probably in an ineffective organization. And I think there's a lot of truth in that snappy statement. And yes, what's also true is Russell Reynolds found out that 90% of the cost of bringing in a C-level leader is purely spent upfront in the selection, assessment, and hiring process, essentially what you pay to Russell Reynolds and the others. And only 10% or less is spent to make that same exact hire successful once they're on board. In my book, I talk about the imbalance of organizational investment. And let me throw in one more number for you. The annual spend on learning and development is $366 billion US. Now, in the US alone, 166 billion is spent on learning management solutions. Now, if you take any sum from that, any percentage you like, and invest it in a proper transition for your executive level, I guarantee to you it will be a very meaningful investment with an almost guaranteed return, instead of putting it into systems that are outdated in nature and hardly any offtake by the large number of employees. So, and now we are in the pandemic, so of course, the Great Resignation starts to kick in, McKinsey has found out that roughly 40% of those who resign don't have another job lineup. So people know what they don't want anymore, but they're not quite sure what they want. So again, it keeps adding pressure. I heard the Marriott CEO blaming the lack of labor on Amazon, because Amazon pays, I don't know, $2 per hour more in the US, and they've hired 100,000 blue collar people to work in the warehouses. Well, I guess we all have choices, and as CEOs and CHROs, we will have to do what is the right thing to do for our business, and not just look at left and right and start to blame it on others. So as you can see, I think that the business case for exponentially challenged executives is quite real, and it's not something that suddenly happened and nobody really took note of that. So let's look at what is the stress side of it. And again, I think the one study that I really found fascinating was done by the National Institute of Health. And they found out, so they were surveying executives in normal times and during their transition time. And what they found out is that the executives ranked their transition to be more stressful than a divorce or a significant health challenge. Now, again, we should not underestimate that. Transitions are stressful in general. And so at the very top, it may actually result in significant burnout and other issues that we are well aware of as HR leaders. So that brings us to the second poll. And if you were to type into the chat a number between 1 and 5, what do you think is the effect of the global pandemic on executive transitions? So I'm going to give you a minute or two to type in if you believe that the pandemic essentially makes it easier or slightly easier, or it will have no effect whatsoever. It will make it slightly more challenging or significantly more challenging when it comes to executive transitions. Yeah. Oh my God, I see lots of 5s and 4s. Yes, the other day I was running a masterclass and someone typed in 1, and I said, I would like to unmute this person to understand what it is that makes it so much easier. And she said, I confused the scale. I wanted to say 5. So yes, I think it's really telling. And I can tell you from my own experience now, as someone who supports finance in Vodafone, we've had 5 CFOs joining us during the pandemic, and 2 of them have started to see their actual team face to face like a month or 2 ago. And so if you imagine you have joined a new organization, there's no office location you can go into. There's no face-to-face meeting with anyone, including your own line manager, your direct reports, your peers, and so on. It is very hard to really get a sense of the vibe, of the energy, of the DNA of an organization. Of course, you get all that stuff sent to you digitally, but it's not quite the same. When I have meetings with fellow HR leaders or coaching engagements, I try to be early for my appointment. And I take 15, 20 minutes just to sit down at the reception and kind of soak in the vibe and the culture of that organization, just to see what kind of people walk in there. What is the conversations about? What is the energy? What is the vibe? None of which you are able to do if you have a scheduled kind of call like this one, where you have a tile on your screen, and that's all data points you get. So I think it's fair to say that the pandemic has made it even more challenging. So the 40% figure pre-pandemic may need to be revised a year or 2 down the line, depending on what the data shows us. Let's take a quick look at the cost side of it. And again, we're all in HR, so we understand that attrition can be a costly undertaking. But let's look at how much does it really cost. So I have brought just 2 data points with me. One of them is the Deloitte directors remuneration in the FTSE 100 companies. So this is the salaries of CEOs of companies. And I've just taken the average number here. This is market cap 8 to 17 billion. So the CEO is paid around 850,000 pounds. That's just the base salary. All the other perks will be added on top. So many studies that look at attrition and the real cost, the real cost that also comes with the opportunity cost of having a C-level role vacant for some time. Some land somewhere between 10 to 30 times that salary as a cost. So you can easily assume, if that's what your CEO is making, if that CEO post and that transition was not a successful one, you can essentially assume a number around that to be the real cost to your organization. The other study that I have, which you won't see on the slide, look at it very specifically for the US. And they found out that if you're a large market cap organization in the US, an average CEO attrition will cost you 12.8 million US dollars. Again, a number that is very well in the range that you see here. So you can see how easily the lack of investment and the lack of support can result into an opportunity cost that is far greater than the initial sum and the initial investment you could have made into that transition. So I won't dwell too much on this one, but I just want to name out 4 organizations. So this is SAP on the top left. Then you have Hewlett-Packard on the top right. Then you see Boeing on the bottom left, and you see Uber, the riding app on the bottom right. Internal promotion, external hire, reappointment of the previous CEO, and external hire. None of which have worked. Now, I could have done 20 of these slides easily. That was the easiest part in the book, to find prominent examples of epic C-level kind of failures. I thought hard about involving an HR, including an HR example. I didn't do that because I wanted that to be more about the CEO. So if CEOs fail, then you can assume that everyone else on that leadership team can fail also. But I think we got our own examples in our own kind of shop, such as the GM CHRO who tanked after eight months in the role in 2018, and many, many more others. SAP actually had a CHRO who had to step down because that lady was using the Learjet for weekly flights between her home location and the corporate location. And although it was a perfectly entitled benefits in her employment contract, it was not quite in line with the green ambitions that the company was articulating externally, and some of those things that they really tried to establish themselves as a green company. So as you can see, all sorts of different things can get in the way, but A, executive transition failures are costly, and B, you can rightly assume that if your CEO or your chief sales officer has tanked after a couple of months in a row, your competition will start to eat into your market share. You will have a more de-engaged or less engaged sales function as a result. You will have more attrition further down the line, although technically not related to the top level leader leaving the company. So you can easily see how the 10 to 30 times formula comes into play. And you can also look at it through the executive lens, right? So I have been fortunate enough, I've failed twice when I have transitioned across different industries, different companies and countries. I've just been lucky enough that that transition failure happened to me early enough in my career. If it had happened at the later stages, I think chances are I would have never landed another job like this again. And so there's a real cost to the executive, and not just on the monetary side, on the financial side, looking at it from an organizational lens to say, ooh, yeah, that's a little expensive. Now I have to check out 10 million for this failed, whatever, CEO transition. But actually, to that individual, I would claim that the cost is much higher than whatever the sum is, because that will have an immediate impact on the future trajectory of their career going forward. So that brings us to HR. And what are we doing for our executive population? What is the state of the nation when it comes to executive onboarding in our own companies? And Richard, I know we are recording the session. I don't know whether for this question we should stop the recording or what is that? It's my job. Thank you. So yes, so the reality is it gets super lonely at the top. That's the reality of it. So, it may be a surprise to some of the executives how lonely the top job can be. And although it sounds maybe counterintuitive, but really suddenly when you make it to the kind of top role, you are cut off from a lot of your fundamental mentorship, groups of people that you have been used to deal with when you were not in the top job. So if then the organization kind of lets you down on what you could need to be successful, well, then I guess that's another problem, and that doesn't really make it any easier. So let me give you two quick interventions before moving to the case study and concluding with a final slide before we open up for Q&A. So first of all, it makes absolute sense to invest in executive transitions. I mean, whether you look at it through the individual lens, the organization lens, or the stakeholder lens, the benefits are plentiful. So then the question becomes, what is one or two interventions we can share that would make this more successful? So the first one, and the most easiest one, is invest a tiny sum in a good executive transition coach. So not a leadership development coach, not a first 90 days coach. If you're looking at the C-level, make sure that's someone who can play the full piano, not just half of it. So that's the simplest one. And again, there are two studies that have found that executives who get the proper support and using a structured framework have a 50% lower likelihood to derail. So it's not zero, but it's 20% instead of the 40%. And their break-even time, their time to become productive, is also cut by another 50%. So if it normally would take your C-level leader 6 months to start becoming productive, they will be able to do that in a 3 months time period. The second thing I want to mention is a phenomenon I've seen, and probably in our company, we are guilty of that as well. We have optimized the onboarding process for the masses. So if you're a new employee to Vodafone, on day one, we call it the perfect day one, you will get a working laptop, a working smartphone, both of which you have already selected before you came on board. So you will be triggered that email that it gets you pick your whatever tech, toys. And then on day one, you have a laptop that is fully working, your email is set up, you have access to all the internet, all the Vodafone University, everything you need, perfect. Now, as you can see here, the top three aspects are important and are covered by many, many organizations. I mean, those of you who were given 3s and 4s probably are somewhere here. So you have covered the admin arrangements, the business orientation. We got a full day onboarding lecture, a module that is now also done virtually as a result of the pandemic. So on your first day, literally a full day event, you get inducted on all things Vodafone, and you get triggered to do your legal compliance trainings. But the reality is, what you need for the executive level is a lot more than that. If that works for 99% of the population, that's great. But for the 1%, you need things like setting structured frameworks to make sure that the expectations are aligned between the leader, the teams, and whoever is the one up and one down. Making sure that there are a structured way of organizing meetings with key stakeholders. And please don't leave it to PAs to randomly make those arrangements and book travel into the business diaries. And lastly, cultural familiarization. I mean, many of you mentioned culture when we looked at some of the top 10 reasons for failure. And again, I think I can't emphasize that enough. Whatever you want to call it, leadership induction, culture familiarization, a leadership assimilation, there are many, many words essentially describing the same thing, which is you have to help people to succeed. And by the way, that does not include just externally hired people, but sometimes if someone makes the move from a division to the group level, or from a country level to the group exco level, well, that in itself is something that probably needs a cultural familiarization program of some sort. Now, let me briefly run you through the case study. So this is someone who used to be a super successful CEO. This is one of the big four. And the chairman of the firm decided that that individual should become the next CHRO. So what sounds simple involved actually 7 of the major transition challenges, one of which you don't see on the slide, which is a cross-functional challenge. So that individual and I contracted for 12 months, and we worked together to make that transition most successful. And of course, we used a framework. We didn't use the framework that I described in my book, which is called the Double Diamond Framework, but we used a structured framework to make sure that that transition was successful. So what did we do in actual terms? So first of all, we did identify and interview key stakeholders before her actual starting date. This is super important. You don't have to lose time to wait for day one to start acting on what you want to get through. But you have, if you know of your appointment, if your appointment has been announced internally, it's perfectly fine to start reaching out and making sure that this is how you can get to a quicker kind of turnaround time as and when you hit the role formally. She also virtually met her new leadership team. That meant the HR leadership team that she would inherit as the CHRO, as well as the top team that she was a member of. We then started to look at the context, identified what is the time frame that she had, and what should be the outcomes for our working together. And she started to very quickly establish relationships with key stakeholders, in particular with the line management team, because those are the most crucial ones when it comes to the actual transition. We then discussed and set up a process to assess her existing leadership team. So she had two members of that team that were not happy about that appointment. One was simply running out of energy and patience. The other one had high hopes to land the top job, but she had not been even asked to participate in the process. So she had been quite disruptive behind the scenes and trying to kind of undermine the newly appointed CHRO behind the scenes. And that had to be addressed very, very quickly. So what we did is what is called a new leader assimilation. So a session where you spend time with your future team and you open up, as well as you go and ask your teams all sorts of different questions. So you establish a better understanding and align expectations, ways of working, as well as performance standards. We then committed to, go back to the stakeholder landscape. We did that properly with a proper framework and a proper tool. And, each time she had an upcoming crucial conversation, we would sit down and prepare that conversation. And she would pitch to me the same way she would then sit in the room with the chairman and have that half an hour or 1 hour long conversation. So it was really, really important to really give her all the confidence and clarity that she needed ahead of these conversations. Sometimes it was a 15-minute conversation on the phone because something urgent had happened. And lastly, we worked on elements around culture and communications. But I think what was really outstanding about this whole relationship was that although new in role, she got an outstanding performance rating in her first year being a CHRO, which is super rare. And B, the construct of the contract was that it was only a 2-year stint, although technically there had always been 4-year stints at the Group Exco, but she got an early extension on the back end of that performance rating. And that was really what she was hoping for, to be able to see the transition transformation through, not just be in it for a year or two and have to say bye. So a quick recap. We know that executive transitions are first and foremost a failure because our leaders are exponentially challenged. We know that the cost of failed executive transitions can be somewhere between 10 and 30 times the salary cost of the leader. It gets super lonely at the top, particularly if there is not the right support mechanism in place for the C-level leader. What actually works is any kind of structured, proper onboarding supporting framework. And we also know that success is not a matter of luck, but something that can be maintained and managed properly from an HR point of view, but also from an organizational point of view. And I would like to conclude with a poem before opening up for Q&A and hand over back to Richard. So this is not my own, by the way. This is written by someone very famous. Her name is Ruby Dee. She was a legendary actress and an activist who was nominated for an Oscar at the age of 83, and she died at the age of 91. So the way I want to come at the poem is to look at it through the executive transition frame. Today is ours. Let's live it. Our work is strong. Let's give it. Transition is dear. Let's bring it. The past is gone. Don't rue it. Our work is here. Let's do it. Whatever was wrong, let's right it. The battle is hard. Let's fight it. The road is rough. Let's clear it. The future vast. Don't fear it. Is faith asleep? Let's wake it, because today is ours. Let's take it. Thank you.
Really enjoyed that, Navid. Well done. That's great. I'm just going to stop the recording now so that we can have some questions. Bear with me a sec.